Okay, so we're now in the small intestine. So we've taken our food and we have gone into the alimentary canal through the mouth. We've chewed that up with our teeth. We've added saliva from our salivary glands. We've moved that through our esophagus down into our stomach where we've added hydrochloric acid. We're now turning that into chyme as it's being churned up, and that chyme, that digested food, is now going to be emptied into the small intestine. We've talked about the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, and the fact that they're going to add the stuff that we need in order to break down that food further. And then we're going to start to absorb it into our small intestine. Okay, so that's where we are. Tracing that piece of food through the system. So what does the small intestine do? It does several things. Obviously, it's going to move food through it, so it's going to propel. It's going to be churning as it's kind of breaking and moving that food through the system. That's going to break it down further, so mechanical breakdown. The chemical breakdown, which is digestion. And then the most important thing, we're going to get the stuff from the food. We're going to have absorption. It's going to bring the nutrients out of the food through the small intestine wall into the blood so that we can actually use it. Okay? So the small intestine has three sections. You have the duodenum, that area that's, kind of makes a comma around the pancreas. It's kind of fixed. It doesn't really move there. It's not as, doesn't kind of move as not as flexible as the ileum and the jejunum because it just kind of stays fixed around the pancreas. It goes from the pyloric sphincter to the jejunum, which is the second section. This is where your bile ducts and pancreatic ducts empty, so your digestive bile salts and pancreatic enzymes come in here. This is where enzymatic digestion begins, and it's about 25 centimeters long, so it's the shortest section. Then you have the jejunum, which is the second section, and it goes from the duodenum to the ileum, and this is where digestion and absorption of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats is going to occur. So you're going to start to add, you have those enzymes, you're going to start breaking things down even further, and I should put nucleases here too. They start to break down. And then in the ileum, which is the last portion, it's going to join the large intestine. So this is how the food gets from the small intestine to the large intestine. There's a valve called the ileocecal valve that connects the ileum to the cecum of the large intestine. And what primarily happens here is absorption of vitamin B12 and bile salts. You also have some Peyer's patches, if you remember that from immunity. So you have some immune function in this portion. And this section is about 3.5 meters long. Okay, so duodenum is where you're going to start your digestion by adding the enzymes. The jejunum, more digestion, absorption, and then ileum, some more absorption. Okay, so that's basically, there's more stuff going on, but that's just kind of the overall idea of what's going on in the three different sections. If you could look at them microscopically, you would see some differences in how they look from histology, but in general, there are some things that are very common about the small intestine. And what the things that are in common are circular folds, villi, and microvilli. And so again, depending on where you are, it may look a little bit different depending on what its function is. But if you could look at a small intestine, you would see these circular folds. And what that does is it kind of makes the chyme makes it move in a spiral direction and kind of flow over those folds. So it increases surface area, which means the chyme has to stay in there kind of longer, and the longer it stays in there, the more surface area there is. It's going to cause more nutrients to be able to be absorbed. So you, instead of having a, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6 meter long intestine, without those circular folds, you would probably need to be, 4 or 5 times as long. You also have an even 2 other ways to increase surface area, and this is the villi. So on each one of these folds, you have these little kind of finger-like projections that are where absorption can take place. So if you look at the villi, they're going to have these little fingers that have a lymphatic vessel and a vein or a venule associated with them. And that way absorption can take place. You can take stuff back into the lymphatics and back into the blood in order for you to absorb nutrition. And so there's many of those all along these circular folds. So that increases surface area. And then if you take a look at an individual villus and blow it up, you'll see there's microvilli. So even on the villi, there's even smaller finger-like projections called the brush border or microvilli. And they have enzymes that help break down carbohydrates and proteins, and again, increase surface area for digestion. So these are not cilia, okay? These are not the hair-like cilia. These are actual finger-like projections of the villi, okay, called microvilli. So all of these things are there to increase surface area for digestion and absorption. So form follows function. So what goes on in the small intestine? The chyme from the stomach, all right, that's going to have those partially digested carbohydrates and proteins that have started to being broken down in the stomach. Remember, the saliva was breaking down some sugars. Your hydrochloric acid is going to start neutralizing and denaturing the proteins in the stomach. And you're going to have undigested fats. So all that's going to start to move into the small intestine. It'll stay there for between 3 and 6 hours, depending on what needs to be digested. You're going to get rid of most of the water, going to reabsorb or absorb most of the water out of the small intestine and most of the nutrients. Okay, so by the time it gets to the large intestine, it's really just waste product. There's just the solid stuff that you couldn't digest or absorb. Okay. There are hormones. Remember, we talked about CCK and secretin and the role that they have in causing the pancreas and the gallbladder to release their contents. They also inhibit gastric secretion. Okay, so we're going to kind of slow down the stomach and give time for things to move to the small intestine. You don't want the chyme to be dumping into the small intestine too quickly. If it dumps too quickly, if too much chyme comes into the small intestine, it makes you feel bad. It can give you nausea and vomiting. It's called dumping syndrome, and this is what happens a lot of times when people have gastric bypass. They eat too big of a meal, too much chyme goes in the small intestine, and then they just throw it up. So you learn pretty quickly after having gastric bypass, you've got to eat small meals to prevent that chyme from dumping into the small intestine, because the stomach's just not big enough to only release small amounts at a time. It just kind of pushes it all through. So that's a side effect of having gastric bypass. Just like the stomach, there's no ingestion or defecation. All we're doing is the moving it through, digesting and absorbing. So what's being digested? Well, carbohydrates. So this will show you where the different enzymes are released, where they're released from, and what they're doing. So remember, your mouth has salivary amylase. That's going to start breaking it down. Your pancreas has pancreatic amylase, and that's going to be active in the small intestine to continue to break down those starches and sugars. And you're going to break those down from big starches, big sugars, into like what are called disaccharides, and then you're going to want to break those down into monosaccharides, or single sugars. And the single sugars, the monosaccharides, are the only thing that can be absorbed. All right, so for it to go into your bloodstream, you've got to get it down to that level. And so you're going to do that as well by using brush border enzymes, things that can break down big sugars into smaller sugars in the small intestine. Okay, so I try not to read slides to you, but this will show you a little more detail. Now, these monosaccharides are going to be absorbed into the blood, okay, and then taken back through the hepatic portal system. All right, so we've talked about how things that come from the small intestine go back through the hepatic portal system before they go to the heart. So you've got your mouth, salivary glands, you've got your pancreas secreting enzymes, and then your small intestine secreting enzymes as well, all to break down large sugars into small sugars so that you can absorb those small monosaccharides into your blood and then use it throughout your body. You can break down protein. So again, where does that happen? Who's making what? You have pepsin, okay, and it's going to work in the stomach to start breaking down those proteins. You have trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase from the pancreas, which is going to work in the small intestine. We were made in the pancreas, sent to the small intestine. It's going to start breaking down these proteins. So you have large proteins broken down into large polypeptides by the pepsin in the stomach. Those large polypeptides will be broken down into some smaller polypeptides using the pancreatic juices. And then again, you're going to have some brush border enzymes from the small intestine that act in the small intestine to break down those polypeptides into amino acids. Okay, and that's what you can take in. All right. how can you take in an amino acid? How can you absorb an amino acid? Because they're kind of big. So they can't just diffuse or osmose or something like that, because osmosis is the movement of water. So to move proteins, it actually requires you to physically have active transport. And so here you have these amino acids, and you're going to have a transporter that will move those amino acids across this brush border membrane, okay? And they're going to be moved across the cell and then released by another transporter on the other side, the basal side, into the interstitial fluid and then into the capillary beds. The capillary beds are porous, and so the amino acids can go right into the capillary bed. All right, so again, you have to have active transport of moving those amino acids from the lumen of the intestine across those intestinal cell walls and then into the capillary. Again, I try not to read slides to you, but there's some more information there for you to take notes. All right, so then you got to break down fat. So where does that happen? You have, remember, salivary glands. You have that lingual lipase that's going to work in the mouth to break down these unemulsified triglycerides. So that fat just comes into your mouth. It's going to start to break down there. The stomach has gastric lipase, and that's going to work in the stomach to break them down. Then the liver is making the bile. The bile goes to the gallbladder. The gallbladder is going to then secrete that into the small intestine. That's going to work to start to emulsify the fats. And so what that means, I'm going to show you a picture. You're really going to kind of surround the fat in a way that you can take it in. Okay, so you're kind of going to make a bubble around it. So you have an easier way. Think about if you have water and you have, like when you're washing your dishes and you put fat, like oil, and you add Dawn dishwashing detergent, and all of a sudden it kind of forms those little pockets of oil. It's like the Dawn just kind of grabbed it up and made it into little smaller oil droplets versus a big oil sheet. Kind of the same things going on here. All right, and then the pancreas is going to have lipases as well that work in the small intestine till you break these down into a form that you can then carry back into the bloodstream. Actually, sorry, into the lymphatic system. Okay, so the smallest things that you're going to be dealing with are fatty acids and monoglycerides. So what that looks like, you have this large fat globule, you have these bile salts, and they will kind of break these big globules into little fat droplets. Okay, and then they form these things called micelles, and these micelles will ferry them across those small intestine villi, across those small intestine cells with the little microvilli. They will ferry them across. And remember, you have lymphatic drainage in your small intestine as well, and the lacteals are the tips of the lymphatics, and they have little kind of flap valves that allow large molecules to be able to cross in. And so these little fat pieces will be able to be taken into the lacteal and then drained into the lymphatic system. Okay, so again, there's the detail if you want to read that. Nucleic acid, you got to break down DNA and RNA. So anything that you eat is made up of cells, and so cells have a nucleus, and the nucleus is going to have DNA. You have messenger RNA and transfer RNA and ribosomal RNA. All that needs to be broken down so that you can use those into their component pieces. So you have your pancreatic ribonucleases and deoxyribonucleases for DNA and RNA. That works in the small intestine to break these down into their sugars and bases and phosphate ions. So you can go back to your chemistry section and see how DNA is made, how they're hooked together, and all the component parts of DNA and RNA. But you're going to break it down into those sugars, bases, and phosphates. You also have some enzymes from the small intestine that work in the small intestine to break these down to even smaller pieces. Okay, so breaking down the big DNA and RNA into its component sugars, bases, and ions. So once we've broken all that down, we've got to absorb it so we can use it. So all your food, most of your electrolytes, most of the water, all that should be absorbed in the small intestine. There's very little that goes to the large intestine that's usable. You're getting out all the stuff that you need from the small intestine. And this typically occurs in the jejunum, so before you get to the ileum. In the ileum, you can reclaim bile salts. and those can be taken back to the liver, so the liver can make more bile to go to be stored in the gallbladder. Most things are going to be absorbed by active transport, and they go into the blood, except the lipids, which are going to go into the lymph. Remember, they're going to be emulsified from those little micelles, and then going to be carried into the lymphatics and drained that way. We have to absorb the food, about 9 liters of water, some gastric secretions. All that's going to go into the small intestine, and it's got to be taken out. And so about 95% of that is going to be taken out of the small intestine and absorbed by osmosis, because remember, water moves by osmosis. Anything that's left, hopefully, will be taken out by the large intestine. You'll absorb it there. Now, that can change if you have diarrhea or constipation, so that changes the amount of water in the feces is a function of whether or not things are moving through rapidly, like when you have diarrhea, or moving through slowly, like with constipation. This water uptake, remember, water follows sodium, so you're going to have these solutes that are inside the cells that form an osmotic sucking pressure. So all the solutes inside those cells help to suck that water back in so you can absorb it. The only one homeostasis problem I'm going to talk about is malnutrition, which is usually due to malabsorption. So if something's going on where you cannot absorb nutrients, that means there's something going on in your small intestine, and that can be a problem. And so one thing that we hear about are things that can interfere with the delivery of bile and pancreatic juices. If you don't get the bile or the pancreatic juices, you don't have the enzymes that you need to break down things with a bile to emulsify the fat. Remember, I told you that if you have gallbladder disease, they take your gallbladder out. Now you don't have the bile, so you get diarrhea from eating too much fat. If you're in pancreatic failure, if you've got pancreatic cancer, you don't have those enzymes, then you're not going to be able to make the enzymes to break down your sugars and proteins and things like that. So you're going to have problems absorbing because you can't break them down to the smallest pieces that you can actually absorb. So sometimes that's a sign of someone that's got some pancreatic issues, is all of a sudden they're losing weight, and they're hungry all the time. They're not able to absorb that nutrition. Gluten allergies are a real thing, and that can cause malabsorption too. You can get some problems of the small intestine due to a gluten sensitivity. And then you can just have a damaged small intestine. That can be due to bacteria, it could be an infection. Some antibiotics will start to kind of mess up the lining of the small intestine. So if you're having issues and you've been ill, you might need to go see a doctor to get an antibiotic or change your medicine. That medicine may be causing you more harm than good. So the main thing we'll talk about with small intestine is just the malabsorption of nutrients. Something's going on in your small intestine that doesn't allow you to absorb all those nutrients that your body needs to be healthy and repair and maintain itself. And that's it. So next stop is the large intestine.